How does communication change as your organizational scope changes?
Communication, probably one of the most misunderstood fundamental concepts of being a human. Um, the thing about communication that I think is most important that everybody sort of accept into their hearts is that it is a two-way process. Part of communication is what you're saying and how you say it, but an entire half of communication is what is heard and what is understood and what people take away. And I think just without that fundamental understanding of how you pursue communication is really 50% of the job. You'll always miss out on something if you don't have that. So that's the first thing. The second thing, though, is I think it's a lesson in when to be specific and when to generalize. Um, and so when I think about communicating as a higher level leader, as a first line manager, you're in the details with your team. You're talking about what's the future of this project, what's the next thing we're going to work on, why is it exciting, what are our struggles. It's all day to day. It's all in the moment, right? And thus, as a first line manager, you have full context on everything that the team is tackling. And that's great. And it's very good for your job. That evaporates very quickly as you take on more scope and you get removed by these levels. And the other thing that happens is that your communication, so what you say, becomes amplified. And I haven't thought much about this one, but it might also be an exponential curve of increase in the amplification. And this is sort of, there's a classic mistake, right, of startup CEOs. They've got 10 people in a room and they're super excited about the next release coming out. And so they go, look over an engineer's shoulder and they say, wait, why are you doing it that way? Didn't we talk? Why don't we do it this other way? And then all of a sudden the entire team is off on a new track, right? Because the CEO said it. So it must be what we should do. And that basically applies at every level. You really need to be careful what you talk about, because an offhanded comment on something specific can basically be interpreted as an edict, right? Getting back to our previous why we don't do edicts. And you can unknowingly incur all those relationship penalties and sort of be in this position where you have accidentally shot yourself in the foot. So when I communicate with my teams, it's usually in two main modes. I'll say strategic and vision. So hopefully everybody kind of knows tactical is like the day-to-day. That's the first line manager, everybody's shared context. I avoid the tactical as much as possible, right? So I'm a manager of managers. And when I say something, I know that it can have an effect, right? Regardless of how thoughtful I've been about it. And so I have to be very careful. So I stick to those two modes. So strategic is really about major initiatives, right? So I have 13 teams and we're taking on, who knows how many projects. One major initiative, maybe for a quarter, for half of a year, what are our high level goals? What are we trying to accomplish? Ensuring clarity. So I'll use my voice to repeat things a lot. And I think you'll hear this from other leaders, right? You can never say the goals or the mission or the vision enough. If you don't feel like you're repeating yourself, you're not saying it enough. And so I'll use that just to reinforce, to make sure that everybody's hearing the same goals. And in that case, I'm actually taking advantage of my amplified voice to sort of cut through if there's been any confusion, right? So that if they've thought there were different goals or they thought it was subtly different, I will try to state it very clearly and say, hey, do you understand that these are the goals? And if there's any lack of alignment, then I'm also providing an opportunity for people to speak up. And so that's where I'm really sort of using amplification to find those gaps so that we can correct, versus if I were saying, hey, let's all change this policy without me asking you, I'm creating gaps without caring about what happens, right? Which is not a great practice. So that's the first one. And then the second one is what I call vision communication. I don't really have a better. I don't like visionary. I feel like that's in English that has a different connotation. Um, but communicating about a vision is really trying to paint a picture of the future, which is fundamentally difficult, as we all know. Um, and I think what I've learned to do is sort of embrace my personal fallibility as a leader, right? I can and will be wrong a lot in order to allow the team to embrace failure as an option as they evolve. And I think that's something that become really important, right? In like agile thinking in general, right? Is this idea that you need to fail to learn, you need to fail towards success. I think in most cases that's absolutely true. And so what I'll do is I'll paint a picture of the future, but how you do that is very important. And this is another lesson I was just talking to a teammate about the other day. I call it the fidelity of the communication of the vision. So I'll give you an example, which is go back to that startup, 10 people in a room, right? What you don't want to do when you're telling the CEO, hey, we could build this new feature that could do this great stuff for our customers, is have the designer go spend 3 weeks on a pixel perfect design, maybe even a prototype in Figma or whatever that's clickable and it's amazing, and then you show that to the CEO and they're like, wow, it's done, like you did it, so it's shipping on Monday, right? And this is the classic, engineering team is just like, what? No, like we haven't even had a chance to weigh in on it. Like this is still a concept. And in my opinion, that is a failure of communication on the team's part. That's actually not up to the CEO, right? The CEO is doing lots of things. What the CEO needs to understand, that second part of communication, is what is the fidelity of this idea? How deeply have we thought about it? How close are we to realizing it? And so what I like to do is I match the fidelity of my group communications, my vision communications, with the depth of thought and degree of confidence that we have in them becoming the actual future, right? So we'll talk about, hey, what could be possible? Or here's 3 different things that could happen in this area. But when we're pretty sure, I'll say, it's going to look like this, and it's going to enable this, right? And they're very high level concepts. This is stuff you'd put in a slide deck with bullet points usually. But it's enough to give everybody a shared mental model, or at least the beginnings of a sketch, where they know how their piece is going to affect the future.